can begin.
What?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you all for coming to this panel. There's a lot of people here. This is going to be a very lively panel. I'm Luís Silva from Portugal, and joining me are Claude Lalumiére from France to Canada, to Francesco Verso from Italy, the Bellis from Greece, and Arrate Hidalgo from here, from Spain. And we will try to answer the main question of this panel, which is there a Southern European science fiction? And of course, to ask this, I think that to start with, we should have some definition of sorts, which is probably what we mean by Southern Europe. Is it the Mediterranean area, as it is explained in the subtitle of this same presentation? Well, some people would argue that North Africa should be here, and South France as well. As always, I've been looking online, and the good people of the European Union have something that is called Eurovoc, and Eurovoc, which is the EU multilingual thesaurus, says that the south of Europe, in terms of languages, is comprised by the Cyprus island, Gibraltar, to Greece, Vatican City, Italy, Malta, Portugal, San Marino, and Spain. So I think we have here a very good set of the people from this region to help us come to some sort of answer to this question. And I think maybe we can begin with the easternmost part of Southern Europe, which is you, Bellis. So what can you tell us from the science fiction, the fandom, instead of the art in your country?
Okay, hi, I'm Bellis. I'm from Greece. So actually I'd like to go about this slightly differently, because I'm half Swedish as well, and I moved to Greece 12 years ago. I didn't know there was any science fiction or a fandom or whatever in Greece until 3 years ago, when I all of a sudden found myself at a science fiction club meeting with the Athens Science Fiction Society. So all of a sudden I realized there is actually a very lively science fiction fandom or science fiction culture, or whatever you would say, in Greece. Very active both as pertains to fun activities and professional activities. I have here a list of the books, the science fiction books published in Greek since the year 2000. There are not that many. There are about 25 of them. So the book publishing is maybe not sort of enormous, but the science fiction literature as such from Greece is actually sort of reminiscent of the Anglo-Saxon science fiction, I mean, from the United Kingdom and from the United States. Whereas with a Greek slant, as pertains to where the stories are taking place. There are sort of apocalyptic stories taking place in Athens. You know, the usual hard science fiction stuff taking place somewhere in Greece, and so forth. But the Greek authors and fans are, obviously, they know English, they have English, so they have read the authors from other countries. So Greek science fiction is actually, as I said, rather reminiscent of the kind of science fiction that we are all used to, but with a little bit of a Greek slant. It's not different as pertains to themes or stories, though, as such. And that is maybe a sort of introduction for Greek science fiction.
Now, Francesco, would you recognize the Italian science fiction to scene as having the same point, the same characteristics that Greece has?
Greece has?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, no.
Yes,
I don't think so.
Yes,
No. I think what Bellis said is, of course, true up to a sense that we had a gap to close up to the opening of the internet and the spreading of the technologies. But then I think now it's absolutely comparable. I do run a small publishing house where I do scout and select stories from all over the world, including Greece and Romania, France, Latvia. So I can tell by the content of the stories that the quality is absolutely the same. So that's, but not in the sense of imitating, but in the sense of writing, using the tropes of science fiction, bending them to the actual environment or feeling of depth of the culture of the place itself. So I do consider diversity the highest richness we can have. And in Italy, for example, as we had a very long and deep tradition of fantastic that is going back to Dante and Boccaccio and is going up to Tommaso Landolfi and Primo Levi and Italo Calvino. That is just a start, and when the technology takes over in these authors, in the new generation of authors, then you have the same level of literature, but also, as in other countries, it is considered not as much as literary science fiction, but these are, I think, it's changing because of the present time we are living, where acceleration is taking over, and science fiction is not a literature of an outside world, but is exactly the same world we are living in. And so I do consider, at the moment, science fiction the mainstream literature of the present time. So in Italy, there is a new generation of authors that is using the same tropes as international science fiction, as artificial intelligence, climate fiction, quantum physics, and all the themes that you might think of. It's just that we have, as in other minor countries, a cultural domination by the new lingua franca, that is the English. So many readers do appreciate more an American or an UK author than an Italian one. So we have to fight.
Arrate. Since the early 2000s, I've been discovering the richness of Spanish science fiction. And it has seemed to me, though you guys might have had some issues of asserting yourselves within your own country. Spanish science fiction, for its own readers, it seems to me that it has been a story of success. Would that be your opinion as well?
I guess I'm biased because I've been living in the UK for 7 years, and only for the past 4 years or so I've been rediscovering Spanish science fiction. So for me, it definitely has a much more important role in my life as a science fiction professional than before. But I mean, I think that the Eurocon happening in Spain for the first time ever, I think, is a very good example of how, Spanish science fiction is, I guess, doing better, or maybe becoming more relevant in an international context than before. That said, it was quite interesting to hear Fernando Ángel Moreno talk about about the state of science fiction in Spain yesterday in a panel. Talk about how he considers the history of science fiction in Spain until now as uptight or prudish, and he mentioned franquismo as a main reason why science fiction in Spain might have developed differently than in other parts of Europe. And I think that is connected to the idea of the maturity of the genre in every country. I find the question of maturity very very interesting because it makes me wonder what are the elements that we're looking at when we define the maturity of the genre. And I think that one of the most popular markers of that maturity is the use of regional or local references in genre. Say, I mean, the first time that you, at least in my case, the first time I saw a Spanish name, in a spaceship, it was really exciting because I figured, oh wow, like we actually, there isn't just like Americans and Russians in space, like you can actually have Spanish people doing fun technological stuff in the far future. But I think that maybe because the current political and economical situation is what it is, Southern Europe is being heard as a concept more than before maybe, or maybe because of different reasons. And one of the cultural markers that I find very interesting at the moment for Spanish science fiction is the crisis, the economic crisis. And Susana Vallejo has a really great short story, Gracia. It's translated into Spanish by Lauren Schimo and is available in the Spanish special for Strange Horizons this week. And it is set in a post-economic disaster Hospitalet, you know, like near Barcelona, in the near future. And I think that short story, I think, is probably a very good example of what I'm talking about in terms of like maybe where Spanish science fiction is going at the moment, and that marker of maturity, you know, but that's, I guess that's it for the moment.
I think that we all that live in Europe kind of know that Europe is a very shifty concept, and actually I've only begun to feel as a European when I get out of it, and I started feeling it when I visited to Canada and the US, and they were and people were addressing me as a European and not a Portuguese person. To Claude, from the perspective of the other side of the big pond, do you think first that is there a European science fiction that you can perceive of, and if so, could you identify, or can you identify if there are different flavors of it according to regions?
I don't think I can answer that question.
Give it a try.
Right.
Just give it a try.
For me, it's. I mean, in many ways, I'm a bit of an odd man out here because I'm from Canada, but I have a more personal relationship to this topic than just being either from here or a resident. I don't have a cultural association. I have more of a actually deeply personal association. So I'm going to deviate and answer something else entirely. I first came to Southern Europe 10 years ago. And on that trip, I went to Venice, to Rome, to Bari, all in Italy. I went to Athens, Nice in France, and I finished here in Barcelona. And my imagination was colonized by the Mediterranean. I suddenly started to write mostly about the Mediterranean. And so much so that my first contact with the Mediterranean, which was in Bari, just before I took the boat to cross over to Greece. I went and put my feet in the Adriatic, and in my head composed a 4,000-word story, which that night on the boat I typed out in one sitting. And that was the first shot of Southern Europe into my blood. And there was a story called The Sea at Bari. And it was the first of my European stories. And in fact, I've been translated by one of our panelists here. Arrate has translated another of my Mediterranean stories, one that also appears in Barcelona Tales that just launched here, called The Dance of the Hippocatora, which is set in both Greece and in Barcelona. And that same book has yet another story of mine, I have a whole cycle of stories called Venera Dreams, and that's my next book. It's coming out next year, and it's all about a fictional city-state off the coast of Italy. And the city is mostly based on Venice, as if it were designed by Gaudi and Dali, with a hint of Roman paganism. So like all of those places kind of infused my dream European city, and I wrote a whole book about it. So for me, it's like once I came here, I just felt at home. I just felt when I'm in Venice, when I'm in Rome, when I'm here in Barcelona, I just feel like. And you know, the Greek myths have always been a huge part of my imagination as well. Actually, I've written a whole cycle of updated Greek myths as well. And so this is where my imagination lives. This is so I'm not sure why, but I'm an immigrant of the imagination to this place.
Now, Bellis. So going back to you, you had some key experience and knowledge of the Swedish fandom and of Swedish science fiction, I suppose. Would there be a main point that you can identify between what may be written or what you have read from Sweden or from the north of Europe and what is being written in the Greece nowadays?
I'm not exactly sure that I understand the question properly. Do you mean as pertains to are there similarities, or do you mean the differences between the various kinds of science fiction?
I think the both. If you define, if you ask the question, is there a Southern European science fiction in
as opposed to the northern? Yes. Well, actually, point is, unfortunately, that the answer to that question is a bit sad, because there's hardly any science fiction being written in Swedish any longer. Most of it is fantasy. There is some science fiction. We have a few science fiction authors, and of course, their sort of take on the genre, or their way of telling a story, will be a little bit different, because they are colored off, like Claude told us he was colored by the culture here in Southern Europe, although he's Canadian. So of course somebody who lives in Sweden or who lives in Greece, they will have a different take on life, so to speak, a different outlook on things in general. One is the far northern country, the other one is the far southern country. So that will make the difference basically being, I would say, that, not to make a pun, but anyway, Swedish science fiction is a bit colder. It's not as enthusiastically hot as Greek science fiction. I don't know if that has anything to do with the sun and the snow in the respective countries or not. But, it's a little bit more maybe laid-back reasoning, not that much into maybe loads of action and so forth. Now I'm speaking about the Swedish variety. Whereas in Greek science fiction, the list I waved here earlier on, you have more dramatic stuff like post-apocalyptic events, or high-tech stuff from the very far future and stuff like that. Whereas science fiction in Sweden would maybe most often rather be near-future stuff, dealing maybe a little bit more with, society and so forth, societal problems and so forth. But this is very generally speaking, because obviously there will be exceptions in both countries. There will always be exceptions to any kind of general rule, as you know. So, in a very general way, I would say then that science fiction in Sweden is a bit more laid back, maybe contemplative or whatever, and Greek science fiction would be a little bit more dramatic, like the mythology of Greece or something like that, because Greek people are inspired by those kinds of stories and that kind of mindset.
Maybe I don't know if you want to comment on this or answer the same question. It seems to me that South Europe probably as a lesser scientific bent in their fiction or in their authors, that their authors are come more from social sciences or not from science at all, and they take science fiction more as a metaphorical literature than the properly scientific the reasoning or a laboratory to think about the future. Would you think that could be the case in Italy as well?
Yes, you might say so. Yes, you might say so, up to the point where technology is perceived in each and every country differently, in the sense that, for example, in the southern countries, people might be happy not to know how to use that technology, could be proud not to use that technology, whereas on the north, it would be the other way around. So this is something that that is rooted to the education that we receive, and how the big dichotomy between humanistic and scientific studies is developed in each and every personal life. In Italy, for example, to talk about the literary critics about science fiction, they snob. They don't consider science fiction as a literary genre. Whereas I've heard that in Finland, the most difficult kind of literature to write is science fiction, and so the science fiction writers are considered the writers. So you can tell how the difference are big, and they do affect also, for example, the publishing houses and the editorial lines, and what they want to publish and what they do not want to publish. For example, I had won all the major awards in science fiction over the last 6 years, but still have to struggle to find a publisher that is interested in the post-humanistic near future stories that I do write, dealing with how our body is affected by technology, both on an anthropological and psychological level. Probably if I was born in another country or an English-speaking country, my personal career as an author would have been easier. Nevertheless, I invest in translations now. So
I don't think it's easy in any country.
But I think, well, if you, I was lucky enough to meet many of my gods writers like Alistair Reynolds or Ian MacDonald. They had to struggle, but really not so much as we do have to struggle. You can have probably, the problem is, you can have a first novel out, everybody's happy, but then if you want to change your life and take that path and transform yourself from my case, an IT specialist working in IBM, into a full-time writer, well, yeah.
Very tough question. I'm
Right.
kidding.
Oh, okay.
It seems to me that we've all been listening to panels in which we talk about the problems and issues of seeing our fiction published in English, and that the translation into English is doing its first steps, and it's always very difficult to find the publisher, an Anglophone publisher willing to have our own fiction in their catalog. But it seems to me that without the translation, the world science fiction will not de-exist, because I wouldn't say 90%, but the overall majority of science fiction is read and written in other languages, and in languages other than English. As you work in translation, would you say that translating science fiction has its own perks, has its own issues and challenges? And if so, what kind of ways do you devise to adapt a certain text that might have a lot of new words or some hidden meanings into Spanish?
So the perks of translating science fiction. Well, I think the perks of being involved in a very niche kind of field, I guess, is that you have a more maybe faithful community of people who are interested in what you're doing. I think trying to get into the general contemporary literary fiction is probably quite complicated, but if you focus on, I don't know, yachts, maybe like you have a very specific group of people who want to read books about yachts. But I feel a bit of an in between places, because I translate into Spanish, but I'm also associate editor of an English-speaking press, Aqueduct Press. We do feminist science fiction. Come talk to me if you're interested. I've got plenty of leaflets left. And what I like about what I'm doing at the moment is that I am enabling more Spanish-speaking sci-fi to make it into English. Because what I have noticed, I think, is that there is much more cooperation between other European languages, between science fiction, say, like a French sci-fi book being translated into Italian, rather than, other like minority European languages, not French, but minority European languages making it into English. So with my work, I try to promote more Spanish sci-fi. So that's what we're doing. We're just publishing our first, the first original work written in Spanish, translated into English, El Informe Monteverde by Lola Robles, who is also the person to go to in terms of the history of women writers in Spanish science fiction. She knows everything, seriously. So the issues are, of course, that I guess especially because if it doesn't exist in social media, it doesn't exist at all. I think the main issue I have is that it's social media being not only like the fact that you have to work so hard. I mean, promotion has always been hard, but I guess that now you have all of these people, shoving books at you are shoving books at them, everybody's self-publishing, so Kickstarter all around, it's just like, so there's all of this. So my issue, I guess, is like all of this, like the void of Twitter, like full of echoes, I suppose. That's the thing.
I was nearly interrupting here, as you could see. That's because I'm a real scatterbrain. I was trying to hold the thought what I was going to say, you see. Yeah, so but I kept the thought. So to tag on to that a little bit, professionally, I also work in the publishing business as a translator and an editor. But I work with various kinds of literature. Criminal stories, mainstream fiction, fantasy and science fiction. And the difference, when you work with science fiction professionally, I was, for example, on the editorial board of the Swedish science fiction magazine Nova Science Fiction, nowadays defunct, unfortunately. But the point is, working with science fiction or fantasy, you get this immediate feedback from an audience that is actively interested, namely you people here. I mean, if you go to conventions, they bought your magazine, they've read your short stories, they whatever. Whereas in other areas of literature, there is no such fandom. A little bit in crime fiction, but not the same, actually. So, I mean, the great perk, so to speak, the advantage of working within the science fiction field is this. You get knowledgeable, serious and good feedback from very interested readers, like you people here today. And you get to discuss what you've done and what they are doing maybe also as well, exchanging ideas and sort of exchanging proper and respectful criticism of what you've done in order maybe to do better next time and so forth. And this is really, really a huge perk, a great advantage. This close-knit community of science fiction fans and science fiction professionals within the literary field. I think my friends here are probably agreeing.
Well, actually, I do want to go a little further with that idea. Like, in Montreal, where I'm from, I have a lot of friends who are mainstream authors, and they were intensely jealous of the fact that whenever I published a story, I would get reviews. I would get some readers who would email me, and when they published stories, it was like they disappeared. Like, unless they publish a novel that is heavily promoted, no one reads them ever. Was me. I was just a guest at a short story festival in Serbia a few months ago, where I met a philosopher who was doing work on some of my short stories, and that only happens because she was aware of it, because she was a science fiction and fantasy reader, or otherwise that kind of stuff does not happen. And it is really only in our field where we are guaranteed readers. We will publish anything and somebody will read it, and most likely somebody will tell us about it.
Yes,
and it's a great feeling. It's fantastic.
And
I love it.
It's knowledgeable readers,
Yeah.
knowledgeable readers.
Yes, and it's international. Yeah.
To come back to the issue, you might be, I don't know how many of you know about this, the 3% barrier. The number of books that are being translated in the US is on the number of the total, on the quantity of books that are being published in the US, 3% is translated. That means that in that 3% are included all the languages of the world. That is the level of openness of the US market in comparison to the world. Whereas if you go to a bookstore in Europe, you will find probably in science fiction, let's say 50%, 60% of things are translated by, no?
More like 80 to 90.
Okay, right. I'm an optimist. Sorry?
And that's already counting the small press issues, because most of, at least German science fiction, is in small press.
The microphone.
The microphone is there.
I'm sorry. I'm saying in German science fiction, I'd say about 80 to 90% is translated, and that's taking into account that nearly all of German language science fiction happens in small press that you don't see in the bookstores. In the bookstores, I'd say what you see from the main publishers, it's maybe this 3% German language versus 97 US translated.
Yes, they call it the 3% barrier. Let's try to make it a different number. So that's why translations are very important, and collaborations across different countries are crucial at this moment. Personally, I contribute with a small project, multicultural project called Future Fiction, where we do collect the best short stories coming from all over the world and translate them into Italian. We have people from Sri Lanka, from China, from Mexico, from really all over the world. The fact is that the quality is absolutely the same, and that in their own countries, these authors are the best authors, and they are considered really top-class science fiction writers. It's just that they cannot get out of their country due to, I don't know, first is the translation costs. Second is kind of laziness in the mind of the readers that, the good old times, the masters of science fiction, they all come from a certain countries, and it's difficult to change their perception. That's why I do believe that the Eurocon is the perfect place to try to build a network of small presses and share information about authors, try to build a network that can sustain the work of these people.
I've got one fact about translation. So apparently, I think it was The Guardian this year reported that in the UK, translated books in proportion, they have done better than originally that the book's originally in English.
In the United Kingdom?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how much that has to do with Elena Ferrante. But yeah, translated fiction, which in the UK is kind of treated as a genre, you know, has done better proportionally than just everything else in the UK. So, you know, again, there, yeah.
Are you talking about general fiction or are you talking about science fiction as well? General fiction. General fiction. Okay. Oh, well, that's sad. We should try to make them read science fiction as well from other countries, but we'll see.
It's more now than there was before, so yeah.
Oh, well.
We have about 5 minutes. I don't know if there's a question from the audience.
This is Kelly Theodorakopoulou, the first 100% Greek ever to attend a Eurocon. Give her an applause. This is also her first convention.
And it's being on tape.
Are we talking about speculative fiction in general or just science fiction? Because if it's about science fiction, it's true that in Greece it's the least. I mean, there are too many people in Greece who write, and too many books are published, and a big part of them are supernatural horror, a little smaller part are fantasy, and a part that is a lot smaller is science fiction. But generally, if we talk about speculative fiction in general, it's not such a small, I mean, it's not very popular, but there are lots of books published, mostly self-published. But most of them are not science fiction, are fantasy and supernatural horror. The Science Fiction Club of Athens exists since 1998. There is an event every 2 weeks. It's kind of organized. There are lots of clubs that don't know each other or are not very are not very popular. But there are lots of people interested in speculative fiction in general. But just science fiction is the smallest part of it. But fantasy and supernatural horror are more popular.
Could I tag on a little bit to what Kelly was saying here? Because actually, you are all probably aware of the proverb, never trust a Greek bringing gifts. This comes, of course, from mythology, the Trojan horse, you know. They sent in a gift horse. It was full of soldiers invading the city of Troy. Anyway, this is the exception. This is the one time you can trust a Greek bringing gifts. Because anyone interested here today will be welcome to come up after the panel and take one copy of, there are several issues here of our science fiction magazine, Fantastica Chronica, which is the Greek science fiction magazine published by the Athenian Science Fiction Society, Aleph, of which both Kelly and me are members. And this is just to show you what we are doing. You will probably not be able to read it because the letters look a little bit strange, you see. They're not the kind of letters you're used to, and neither are the words, by the way. But there is an English little leaflet in here, a flyer written by the chairwoman of our Science Fiction Society with information about the club and how to get in touch with Greek fandom. And as a gift from Greece, anyone interested will be allowed to come up afterwards and just take a copy of our science fiction magazine.
You can trust him because he's only half a Greek.
Yes, I'm only half Greek, so yes. You can trust the Swedish part, you know, to give you the gift.
Is there any other question? We are running short of, sorry.
Hello. It was really interesting about the numbers that you mentioned about translated science fiction versus original science fiction, and that most of the market was caught by US authors. And I was wondering if you could each maybe recommend an author from a Southern European country that is not yours.
That's a good question. Well, if all of us can recommend an author from a country, a European country, that is not yours.
Okay.
That is not your own
country. That is your own country.
Okay. I would recommend Roberto Quaglia. a crazy
Yes.
surrealist who
Yes,
has
good
a
man.
totally insane imagination, and he's also a great guy. So, yes. From Italy.
Good recommendation. I support that one. Good man too. He's here. You can meet him if you want.
And I recommend Michalis Manolios, which is an amazing Greek author.
Manolios.
Manolios. Oh, sorry. Greek is not so good. Michalis Manolios, which I had the fortune to translate into Italian and to publish on my label.
I will be slightly forward here, so to speak, because I suppose in the audience there are probably, and up here of course, there are some people working professionally maybe with science fiction, probably publishing. I will actually recommend a good friend of mine who also happens to be a writer, namely Kelly Theodorakopoulos, and you should talk to her, and maybe you would even be interested in getting in touch with her about her stories, and so she could get them published in other languages as well, apart from Greece. So I would recommend her.
I'm going to use my slot to actually recommend a country that is not in this panel, but it's also Southern European. There's a free issue of a Croatian science fiction magazine available at the dealer's room for everybody who's interested. So, go for it.
Well, if I can add my own recommendations as well, I would recommend Luca Massali, Valerio Evangelisti. Almost everyone in Spain working nowadays, from Juan Miguel Aguilera to the new guys, into the especially the women writing here, and that gentleman over there, who has written some wonderful fiction and who has been editing also the Tesseracts. Some issues of Tesseracts that showcases that Canadian science fiction. It's kind of, I don't know if I'm saying something wrong here, but kind of exists also at the margin or at the side of that big thing that is called the US.
Yes.
And it's living its own story.
I think that's right, yeah. I've edited 14 anthologies, actually, so, and most of them have been Canadian only, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so.
And it's a wrap-up. Thank you guys for
Thank you.
attending.
Please come get your copy of the Greek Science Fiction magazine. Come on.
A moment.